my life changed. And literally, as I started to be mentored by these people, I was able to generate my first $1.6 million inside of 6 months. So I'm a firm believer that be careful who you learn from. Don't take advice from people that are broke and not doing what you want to do. Take advice from the people who really have done it, and you'll find that you can do it too.
Hi everyone, welcome to Go All In show here on ABC 15. My name is Stant. I am your host, and today I'm super excited and honored to welcome my special guest here with me today, Douglas Vermeeren. And Douglas, welcome to the house.
Hey, it's awesome to be with you. I'm excited. We're gonna have some fun.
Well, thank you so much. I want to learn so many things from you. This is going to be a very fun conversation. For those who never met Douglas before, Douglas had been known, this is his nickname, known as the modern day Napoleon Hill. And he has been interviewed over 400 top world-class achievers and entrepreneur and influencer, written so many books, producing so many movies, and we're going to talk about this particular movie, How Thoughts Become Things. And Douglas, seriously, like what you have done, speaking, encouraging people, impact everyone about wealth and success and mindset. I know this is like build up the knowledge, the wisdom that you do is like build up for many years. And what I saw is the action that you take. So can you share with us from the very beginning a little bit, like where were you before you boom, just like take this massive action for many, many years and doing this? Like where were you?
It's interesting the way you describe it. You make it sound like it's a sudden, almost like a magic trick, a sudden thing that
right.
we do. But the reality is that it's been a number of years working at it. My big shift occurred to me. I was about 19 and I ran into the book Think and Grow Rich. I had no experience with personal development or any of this stuff. In fact, my parents were really quite lower middle class. My dad worked in construction as a blue collar worker. And just to make ends meet, my mom babysat kids in the home, and even to pay the bills, as a family, we would work. We would actually deliver flyers door to door for realtors, or on a Saturday, I'd help my dad with jobs. Even as a young boy, I remember shoveling dirt. So I wasn't born into this ideal, Shazam, there's success, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, kind of when I was 19 and I ran into the book Think and Grow Rich for the first time, a friend gave it to me and recommended I read it. I was kind of bitten by the idea that if you think it, you can create it. But at the same time, I realized that my level of thinking wasn't creating anything great. And so I kind of, how do we say, I had a friend also say this quote that we've often heard, that if you hang out with 4 losers, you get to become the 5th. And so I was hanging around people who had stinking thinking. And so I decided I wanted to change that. So as a 19-year-old, I decided to go out and start interviewing big business leaders in my community, people that had done successful things. And I started with those who I knew. And eventually I started getting to bigger and bigger and bigger names. I asked them, who else do you know that I should talk with, right?
Yeah.
And I eventually got to even people like Oprah Winfrey. I got to, the founders of companies like FedEx, Nike, Reebok, the Avita Group, Christian Dior, like the list goes on. And then also a lot of top thought leaders. And funny enough, I had no idea that I was going to become a speaker or a coach or a speaker. I didn't even know that was a job, to be honest with you.
Right.
And I had somebody come up to me one day and said, hey, could you come speak to our group? Tell us what Richard Branson told you. I was like, yeah, sure. Okay. So I went to this group. I literally expected there'd be like 5 guys around a table and we'd eat lunch and I'd just kind of share a few quick things. But I came in the room and there was like 400 people there. And I was like, what? And I totally was not prepared. I had no notes or anything. And so I basically just said, yeah, give me a flip chart and we'll ask questions and we'll just do this as a Q&A kind of thing. And as I began to speak, a lot of the answers that I shared were from people that also I had interviewed, but weren't Richard Branson. And then at the end, they came and they said, a couple of people said, could you come speak to our group? And I said, yeah, sure, whatever. And then one lady asked the question, how much do you charge? And I was like, what? People get paid to do this? This is a job? This is cool. So I kind of, I retreated back to some of the top achievers that I'd interviewed. And one that was extremely helpful was Frank Mcguire. Frank was the former VP of marketing for American Airlines and KFC. And he was one of the 4 founders of FedEx. And I just asked him, how do you build a business? Like, if I wanted to speak and teach, how would you do that? And so he helped me kind of build out kind of who I am today a little bit. So that's the beginning, right? Like, that's kind of how it all got started, right? Accident, happy accident, right?
Well, it was a happy accident for me too, because I met one of the mentor, Steve and Jane Lowes from Canada. And I talked to Jane, his wife, and I said, Jane, I want to meet Brian Tracy, because I've been reading his book, Eat That Frog, and using it, and I just want to have a human relationship with him, and she's like, well, I'll see what I can do.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Did you know that Brian's from about 3 hours from where I live? And my very first big speaking event was introducing Brian and speaking on the stage with Brian. So Brian and I have been really good friends for a long time. He's a super awesome guy. And in fact, his son, Michael, and I are also really good friends. So very cool.
That's fantastic. So you interview at that time, like, what is it? Was it like a podcast, a show, a radio show?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. This was prior to the internet. This was a little mini cassette recorder, like a reporter that you see in the old school television. And I'd set it on the table, and I also would take notes. Like, what's funny is, I'll just show you so you can see.
Okay.
I actually, from the beginning of time, have always carried around these black notebooks. And so I've got a whole library, a journal of all these notebooks, right? And what's funny is now I do use technology when I interview, because I'm still meeting with top achievers and business leaders and thought leaders that are my friends, and for the movies we do, I'm still doing that. But I always still, out of maybe habit, have one of these with me everywhere I go whenever I'm interviewing people, because I found that it's not just what they say, but it's also what they trigger. So sometimes they'll say something and I'm like, oh wait, that's gonna help me. And I'll write it down, but my interpretation of what they said may be a little different than what they meant. And just to kind of share how that's been helpful, this idea of application, right? When I was 19 and I started these interviews, again, I was broke. No kidding. I went into a supermarket one day. I put down like a loaf of bread, some Ichiban noodles, and a thing of milk. It came to $4.22. My card declined. Like, I was broke. My card declined. But using the information that I learned from them, my life changed. And literally, as I started to be mentored by these people, I was able to generate my first $1.6 million inside of 6 months. So I'm a firm believer that be careful who you learn from. Don't take advice from people that are broke and not doing what you want to do. Take advice from the people who really have done it, and you'll find that you can do it too.
I mean, Douglas, I just want to cry. It's still like very touching so much, because that $4.22 had changed your life, and it's not just you, it's changed so many people that you touch, and that $4.22, you probably never forget that story like that.
I never had the $4.22. My card declined. I didn't have that money. I didn't have it.
Yeah. $4.22 is just like, wow, this is like so real.
Yeah, it was very sad on the day up. I was very frustrated and scared, right? I was very scared.
Yeah. But I mean, you could go the wrong way, the 19 years old, you could, go steal stuff or do some drugs.
That's true.
Or thing. But what made you decide to just like, you know what, I'm going to learn from, the teachers, right? The gurus.
Well, if I'm also being fair, I think that something that Oprah Winfrey once said that I think is very applicable in my circumstance, and I think to others, is that, a mentor is someone who helps you see something about yourself that you didn't see. And if I look at a lot of these top achievers, it wasn't so much that they helped me learn how to make money. That was wonderful. Like, thank you for that lesson. But they really actually helped me see that I was a good person, that I was a brilliant person, that I could do better than I'd ever done, that I didn't have to let outside circumstances determine who I would be. And up until that point, I really had some big self-esteem challenges, because I had never done anything, right? And things weren't working for me. And if I'm being really authentic and vulnerable, I don't know that I was ever to the point of being super like depressed to the point of suicide, but there were times I was like, I just don't know what I'm going to do with my life. And I don't know, maybe I'll one day be kind of homeless and that's the way I am. And And I think there's also these elements of self-love too, right? Like if we look at, you hear that idea that your network determines your net worth. Right. But I really think your network also significantly determines your self-worth, right?
Right.
If we surround ourselves with people that care about us and believe about us and expect better about us, we tend to rise to, how should we say, the standards that of the group that we surround ourselves with. And I think that was probably the biggest blessing. And, you know, I'm excited to not only pass it on, but also continually seek for people who bring out the best in me.
Right. Wow, that's amazing. Thanks for sharing that. So interview a lot of people, learn a lot. Then the next step you was just like writing a book about it then, or what?
Well, again, I didn't really even think about writing a book, and I didn't do well in school. So that was probably one of the last things that I was thinking about initially. Since then, I've written a lot of books. And funny enough, I've also went back and I've spoken at my high school, and my old English teacher was there, who, quite frankly, you know, I mean, he at the time thought I was going to be kind of nothing, right? Like, because I wasn't dialed into school. But I have to admit, it was kind of a fun thing to be able to give as a gift to the school and to the school library a variety of my books that had done very, very well. So that was fun to do. But yeah, I didn't think about a book. In fact, I started speaking, and then I got really involved in other business stuff too. So it wasn't like a lot of my wealth even today is not through personal development. I own several companies. I love teaching, and I spend a lot of my time doing that. But my companies I've systematized so that I don't have to be there. Right. And then really kind of from, you know, getting into doing books and stuff. I think my first book, I just had somebody who invited me to come and speak, and they said, you know, we've got a budget of X amount of dollars. Have you got a book? And it was like $35,000. And I was like, I don't have a book, but $35,000, I'll write a book. So I quickly took all these little journals of research that I've been doing over the years, and I actually built a book of quotes. That's what it was, just quotes, ideas that I had, and I put it into a book, and then they bought $35,000 of them. So that's how I got started writing books. But for me, the thing that was the game changer is when I started doing the movies, right? Because as I started as I started being invited more and more to speak on stages, prior to the movie The Secret coming out, I had already met many of these people who were in it. Like I said, Brian Tracy I'd known. I got a chance to get to know Jack Canfield and Bob Proctor, and John DeMartini's one of my best friends, and all these guys. So I kind of knew them before The Secret came out. Right. And my background and interest has actually been a lot in film and TV. I'm like you, I love television and media, right? I love that. And what's funny is as a young man, I thought for sure I'm going to be involved in the film business. Now, this is maybe a weird segue, but I went out and I actually became a stunt person. So I've been a stunt person in a lot of different movies. Really? Yeah. In fact, if we were to really examine me closely, you'd see a scar here. This tooth is fake. This nose has been broke. I've got a background in martial arts, and so I brought that into movies. So when I saw The Secret do so well, I decided I wanted to make a movie as well. Yeah. So I called all my friends that were in The Secret and elsewhere. So in the Opus, we had Jack Canfield, Marcy Shimoff, Morris Goodman, Bob Doyle, John DeMartini, Joe Vitale, a handful of these guys. And then I went and I shot this movie, and it did so well for me. Yeah. And Random House picked it up as a book. They did 23 languages worldwide. And it's a very cinematic movie. Like, in fact, even the segments in it, I got one of my friends who was the camera operator on Brokeback Mountain, Shanghai Noon, Nights, all these Hollywood films. And he shot this, for me, and I wrote it, and it did very well. So the movies have been something that we've been excited about. We've now done 4 of them. I've actually got a deal for 4 more. So the 4 were the Opus, then it was the Gratitude Experiment, which had people like John Gray from Men Are From Mars, and Bob Proctor was in that, and Marion Morrissey, and a few other great ones like Marie Diamond and people. Then we did a movie called The Treasure Map, which was really all about a lot of what I learned in my interviews with those top achievers, how to make an extremely large amount of money. And then we did recently the movie How Thoughts Become Things, which again has the cast. But the 4 that we've got coming up, I've got 2 that are in pre-production right now. I won't tell too much about the details, but because the interviews were so cool and I learned so much from them, I decided when it comes to wealth and money, I wanted to go out and do some more interviews around that subject, because especially during the pandemic, a lot of people had financial difficulties and challenges and so forth. So I also wanted to know, like, people who had achieved millionaire status, like self-made millionaire that didn't come from money, how did they do during the pandemic as well, right? And so I ended up interviewing, funny enough, prior to the pandemic and up until now, I've done about interviews with 700 plus millionaires. So more than 700 people who they either have built their wealth. And by the way, here's the interesting thing to think about. There's really 6 areas where everybody becomes wealthy. The first one's a job. Believe it or not, I interviewed one guy who's a high school janitor who achieved millionaire status on a high school janitor salary. So anyone can do it, right? Like anyone literally can do it. But the main core areas is business, real estate, investment, intellectual property, like your books, your ideas, your courses, your programs, or your networks, like creating a community or a group that you can draw together. And so that's going to be one of the movies. I want to identify all what we call the predictable millionaire points that will demonstrate, can you be a millionaire? Well, you can if you follow what these 700 people did. And if you think about it, like, it's kind of funny because I had somebody point this out to me. There's a lot of great books on building wealth. The Millionaire Next Door is probably one of the greatest ones from Thomas Stanley. The problem is it was written in 1996, prior to the internet. Right? And so in his notes, he's finding that the average millionaire is about 55 years old. But nowadays with the internet, it's actually dropped. The average millionaire becomes that in their early 40s or younger. The youngest millionaire I interviewed was 9 years old, which was interesting. And he did it all by himself, 9 years old. Really? But the other thing that's interesting is Thomas Stanley said that the average millionaire, it takes about 12 years to get there. But the reality is the average millionaire today is about 24 months. If you know the right things to do, you can do it in 24 months. That's the average. The quickest, this is funny, the Guinness Book of World Record has one from 0 to millionaire in 6 minutes and 32 seconds. So I think that that's absolutely incredible. So things have changed. So, with interviewing these 700, I've identified some things that can fast track you, that can also identify through your habits if you're on the right course. How is it, we become a millionaire really $1 at a time. So every dollar that you use is a seed. So if we can recognize what you should be doing with the majority of your seeds, you'll get there quicker. And that's kind of what this new film will kind of show. It'll show some of my interviews. It'll show some patterns. And then obviously if people want to learn it, we're going to probably offer a program on that as well. In fact, we've already launched a program. I brought some of my inner circle into it, and they're already, like, I've got one guy that in 2 weeks is already up close to $250,000, right?
Wow. So the program is and we can post the information in the description of this video too. Is that right?
Well, there's even a Facebook group that we've set up, and it's got free information in it. So if you just type in Predictable Millionaire, you'll find the Facebook group, and it's got lots of free stuff and some of the tools from the interviews and things you can do right now, right?
Okay, everyone, you guys just need to join right now, because why wait, right? This is like free group, free coaching, free information. Seriously. You just need to take action, get out of your own, and
feel free to ask questions too. The other thing that's interesting about that group is because of the pandemic, we've had a lot of people who've also experienced a lot of debt. Some have been living on either their savings, if they had it, or their credit cards, if they didn't have savings, or some other line of credit. Some people have, in fact, even had to sell their house or their business, right? And so if you're in a difficult circumstance, let us share some of those lessons on what the millionaires have done to protect themselves during these times. It's not just about making money, it's protecting it too, right?
Sure, definitely.
Yeah.
I love that. Thank you so much for doing that for the community, seriously. And let's talk about how thoughts become things, right?
Absolutely.
Because you mentioned that, like, whatever we think we become, right? And like, help us, because my question is, how can it become things? How can it happen? Plus, why is it that not a lot of people achieve it?
Well, it's interesting, and I've just written down on this piece of paper for you the words, how thoughts become things, right? Yes. And even the title itself has some very interesting messages in it. So here's the one thing, when we talk about thoughts become things, everybody talks right away about your thoughts, right? They say, how can I think more positive? How can I avoid negative thinking? How can I, right? And they get really hung up on this idea. The other thing that they focus on always is the things, right?
Yes.
How can I get those things, right? Like I want to have the new house, the new car, the perfect relationship, the life of less stress, etc. Well, you know what's interesting is these two things are not the most important messages in this. In fact, in the film, it was interesting. Bob Proctor pointed to something interesting. He said that nothing can either be created or destroyed. Everything is energy, right? So if you think about that, let's bring it to a non-metaphysical way to say this. One of my mentors said this. He says, did you know that they're always printing money at the mint? Every day they're printing money at the mint. That's what the mint does. So if you think about it, there's no shortage of money coming off the assembly line there, right?
Yeah.
Always printing money at the mint. And in the film, Bob Proctor also used the example of the Maharaji when he was going to build his Center for Transcendental Meditation. You know, one of his people said, well, where's this money going to come from? And the Maharaji simply said, well, wherever it is now, right? And so I think the thing that we need to start with is having the faith that pretty much anything that you ever want already exists in some form. Even things that are not yet invented, right? The problems that will provoke the solution, the problems already exist, the needs already exist, the ideas are somewhere in the universe. Like, so this idea of things, it's not as difficult as you'd think. For example, if you wanted to have a Ferrari today, right? Well, the reality is they exist already.
Yeah.
It's not like you have to go to your garage and drop a blueprint and go over to the auto store and pick up the parts and go to your garage and hopefully assemble it. No, that's not even your job. It exists already. And so one of the things that I think is really interesting to understand if we're talking about sort of the law of attraction, I'm just going to draw a quick little diagram here, and I apologize, I'm not the best artist in the world, but you'll get the idea. Most people think if they're an individual, right? Like this is the person.
This looks great.
And if they want the thing, right? If they want something, again, if we use the example of a Ferrari or whatever we're going to do, they want the thing. Most people have the impression that, you know, the thing is going to be drawn towards them. In other words, you can just kind of put out feelings to the universe and suddenly, bam, the Ferrari appears. But that's not really the way that it works. I mean, sometimes it works that way, but the majority of the time, it's actually the universe is going to show you where the thing is. And it's going to be you that has to move towards it, not it towards you. So you do have to take action. You have to look for ways to increase the likelihood that that thing will come into your life and that you'll be able to receive it. In fact, one of the ways that I like to describe the law of attraction is maybe to talk about a sister law called the law of probability. Now, the law of probability basically states this: that which is probable is most likely to occur. So how can you make, if you want this thing to come into your life, how can you increase the probability that it will happen? Well, that's going to be found, number one, in the people that you meet and learn from, right? They'll give you ideas, they'll give you opportunities, they'll give you answers, right? The next is the geography where you go to. Like, again, if you want to have a Ferrari, sitting at home watching Netflix generally doesn't bring that.
Exactly.
But if you get yourself out and go over to the Ferrari dealership, or you do things that will bring in the income, well, now you've increased the likelihood that you're going to arrive, right? And then, of course, there's others, but one of the big ones is frequency. How often are you doing this, right? I like to use the analogy, like imagine, if you will, that there's a bullseye set up at one end of the football field, right? And you've got a bow and arrow, and you're trying to put an arrow in the middle of that bullseye at the 100 yards away on the football field. Well, your chances are pretty low if you're standing 100 yards away from most people.
This is so good.
But if you can take a step forward and another step forward and get closer by, again, the people you meet, the things that you learn, the places you go, the things that you do, and you do it frequently, and you're moving a 1 yard at a time closer to the target, well, suddenly now you're standing right next to that Ferrari, and it's yours because you've done things that are going to open the door. So this idea of the thoughts and the things, the thoughts are what gets it started. It's the spark. Right. But the reality is the how is very important, and most people don't understand that. But even bigger than the how is the become. I love what Jim Rohn once said. He said that if you win the lottery and you want to keep it, you've got to learn how to become a millionaire very quickly, right?
Oh, yeah.
And if you look at the majority of personal development that's out there, a lot of it talks about this idea of what you have to do, right? It's sometimes a bit of a checklist, right? You've got to think positive. You've got to believe you can do it, and all these kind of things. Well, it's all things that you can do, right? And to be honest with you, I am a firm believer in affirmations, but I think the stronger thing is affirmations. What are you actually going to do? Not just what are you going to think, right?
Say that word again, Douglas.
Affirmations. So we're not just focused on affirmations, we're focused on affirmations. We know what we want, we believe. Now are our actions in harmony with that? In fact, as a little segue, if you think about prosperity consciousness really has 3 steps, but nobody ever talks about it. Prosperity consciousness first starts with awareness. So what am I aware of? There's wealth around me, there's abundance around me. We always then take that awareness and we measure it against our beliefs and values. You see, we'll always do what we value most. In fact, my friend John DeMartini once said that everyone is wealthy, it just appears in the form that we value most.
Yep.
Right? And so we measure our awareness of what wealth is according to our beliefs and values. Either we believe we can do it or we can't. We value it enough to make it priority or we won't. That's just basically it. But anything that we value strong enough appears in the 3rd level of prosperity consciousness, which is our activity. How can you tell if someone really believes something? It's because they do something, right? So it's really important that do precede our have. But here's the thing that's interesting is if we go back to this idea of how thoughts become things, even before the idea of become and doing, we have to be. And you've heard that, you got to be it before you can do it, before you can have it.
Love
right?
it.
It's really important. In fact, you've probably heard the quote that says actions speak louder than words, right?
Yeah.
Well, the reality is being speaks even louder than actions. And if you think about this, like, let's get really deep on this for a second. There's a really great book, by the way, that's written called The Speed of Trust by Stephen M.R. Covey. You might have heard that one before, Stephen Covey's son. But in that book, one of the things that he talks about is this importance of being, because as humans, to be honest with you, sometimes we do make mistakes. Right? We do things like, if you think about in a relationship, you know, you might love someone very much, but once in a while you hurt their feelings by things that you accidentally do, maybe even intentionally, but mostly, let's hope, accidentally, right?
Yes.
But if you are being the right thing, you can often repair the mistakes that you make here, and the trust is not broken because they know in your core that you are the right thing, that you're loving, you're kind, you're wanting them to be happy. But when we come with a bad place, we're not being the right things. We're selfish, manipulative, our motives are skewed, and we do something, then obviously it's difficult to repair that because they know we're not being the right thing. So it's kind of like, again, what Stephen Covey said with this idea of being. He said it's almost like we have a bank account, right? And if we be the right thing often enough, we're making positive deposits. And then if we make a mistake, well, those withdrawals don't really terminate the relationship. However, if we're always on the withdrawal and we're always taking out, that all of a sudden when we make another mistake, well, it's unforgivable because this is just the pattern, right? Yeah. So we've got to be very, very careful about that. But in the film, we go through a lot of this. Now, I have to admit, what's very interesting about this, if we come full circle, a lot of people talk about, okay, be, all right, I set a goal, I'm going to be better. Well, the reality is your environment is always stronger than your willpower. So if you want to be something better, we actually need to start by changing the environment to shape, again, the way our thinking is going to move. The reality is if we talk about thoughts, right? Thoughts actually follows that environment, right? Thought always follows environment. So for example, if I even right now, I said to your audience, the word dog, dog, right? Yeah. The reality is no one in your audience was probably thinking about a dog until I brought it up. So most of the thoughts that we have are actually a response to a stimulus. And so if we surround ourselves, again, by a bad environment and bad influences, our thoughts are going to ultimately be unsupportive.
Yeah, the same.
Right? So back to that idea of if you hang out with 4 losers, you become the 5th, right? So what can you do to immediately start creating better results with what you have? It starts by starting to surround yourself with better influences who will talk about who you will be. They'll help you be that. And I experienced that firsthand when I interviewed those 400 top achievers when I first started as a 19-year-old. And to be honest with you, even this last year, surrounding yourself with 700 self-made millionaires, oh my gosh, there were things I never thought about. You see, life isn't about thinking outside the box. That's kind of not a good idea. The reality is life is about thinking in a different box. Find the box that you need to think in and get into that and bring all your friends, right? Because when you surround yourself with high-level thinkers, now all of a sudden we have a capability to rise above who we've ever been before, right?
I love it. I feel like let's finish this. I'm gonna go. You know, like I don't have anything to ask you anymore. It's just like this is so good. The example that you share with us, and you prepare like the marker and paper for us already.
I always have it at my desk. I don't know. I'm one of those guys that honestly, for me, like with the notebooks that I carry and this, I'm maybe old school. I have to be kind of like, that's just the way my brain works. So
this is good. This is good. This is like really, really good. So we learned about how thought become things. Like all four words are so important.
Yeah.
In their own way.
Now, and the become is the most important. It's very important to understand that. The become is the most important, because the reality is back to this idea of having it. That's the things, right? If you really want to have it, you must become, right? You must become. Maybe another way to kind of say it too is when we were doing the film, Bob Proctor and I had a chance to kind of connect. I went down to where he was shooting Paradigm. Now he's a Canadian like me, so he's in Toronto. I could have gone over there, but I decided to go and meet him in when he was doing his Paradigm in Los Angeles, his Paradigm Shift event. And so the day before the event, Bob Proctor and I basically spent the day together up in his hotel room in the presidential suite there. And so I interviewed him, but I had a chance to talk to him about all kinds of other stuff. And I love Bob because he's almost like your grandpa when you meet him. Right? Like he's got that energy that he's so kind, helpful, loving. He wants you to succeed. And, we had some really interesting discussions about this idea of everything that, remember the secret, he said, everything vibrates at a frequency, right? Everything's made of energy. And if we want, say, for example, to get to the Ferrari here on a higher level than maybe where we are, we've got to now have the higher frequency. But there's a couple interesting things that, that Bob and I talked about that day, and one that I discovered after. So here's the first thing I said to him. I said, well, what is it that's vibrating? Again, what we say everything's energy. Well, what is it that's vibrating? And he had an interesting insight, and we discussed this, and he said, well, everything is a manifestation of either gratitude, love, or trust. That's really the three things. And when we are operating at a low level of gratitude, love, or trust, we don't really manifest very much in our life. We can't find better. Even belief in ourselves, right? Back to this idea of our self-worth really determines ultimately our net worth, right? But if we don't believe anything even about ourselves well, it's difficult to get to these higher levels, right? Yes. Now, the interesting thing is if we're, again, now looking at higher levels of gratitude, love, and trust, all of a sudden we begin to tap into the better things of the universe, right? We get to expand who we are before we expand what we have. That's just kind of the way that it goes. In fact, when we were doing the movie The Opus, Jack Canfield said it this way. He said, ever since the Big Bang, remember that explosion that started the universe? He says, ever since the Big Bang, everything has been in expansion mode, right? And so whenever we think at small levels that are counterproductive to that, things that are contracting, that are minimizing, that hold us back, that we think less of ourselves, we're actually not just fighting against our greatest potential or a situation, we're actually fighting against the entire universe, right? Because it's expanding and you're not, right? The universe is essentially like an echo chamber. How you decide to show up will determine what comes back to you. It's like a boomerang, right? Yes. So if you show up with competition, jealousy, criticism, feeling bad about things, fear, doubt, all these things, that's exactly what the universe brings back. And that's reflected in this. Now, here's the interesting thing that, I thought about after, and, I didn't talk about this with anybody, but the reality is most people think that if it's meant to be, it's up to me to climb. And the reality is it's not up to you, right? Because most of us have these feelings of self-doubt, of worthiness, of questions of whether we belong, right? In fact, that's often why people think really, really big, and they have a great idea and they're enthusiastic until they start thinking, how am I going to do this, right? As soon as they think, how am I going to do this? Well, then they're like, oh, I can't do that, and they put it away. But the reality is you can get the help of others to climb this as well. Let me explain what I mean by that, right? Like, you remember also Albert Einstein said, a problem is never solved at the same level of thinking that's used to create it. Remember he said that? Yeah. But the reality is your network is also your safety net. They're the ones that are going to help you solve the problems. So let's use an analogy. Let's pretend that I have got with me, I've got, a glass of water. I am the glass of water. And let's pretend that I've just got a little bit of water that's in there, right? And if I surround myself with 4 other people that also have just a little bit of water, we're all going to kind of vibrate at the same level. We're all kind of in scarcity because we can't get to the top. There's not enough in this cup to drink. It's a pretty empty glass of water. But let's say that now I take my glass and I put it in the center of 4 other glasses that are dramatically overflowing. Again, let's use the example again of millionaires. Let's say that if I'm broke right now and I put my near empty glass in the center of 4 self-made millionaires, that the water is just overflowing. What do you think is going to happen to my cup? Well, it's going to start filling up. I'm going to get the water from everybody around me because I'm in the middle of all this water that's being poured in these cups. So my cup will very, very soon be 100% full. So this idea, right? This idea of rising frequencies, it's not up to you to really fill your cup. It's up to you to position your cup, right? So in other words, if it's meant to be, it's not up to you. If it's meant to be, it starts with you. That's the difference. So you've got your cup. The question is, where are you going to put it? And if we go back to this idea of that we become like the people we surround ourselves with, and by the way, it's not just people, it's everything. What shows are you watching on TV? What music are you listening to? Right? What internet sites are you visiting or not visiting in some cases, right? How are you putting yourself into a position where all the things around you can fill you up? Because this is how you're going to perform, right? This is how you're going to do it. If you think about it, it's almost like you've got plants that are in your life, right? And if you've got water, you can water them. If you don't, you can't. Yep. Right? And that's also about focus too, because we've all got a room full of plants. Most of us only have the 1 glass of water. If you try to water everything, it's all going to die. But if you pick 1 or 2 that are really important, that are in line with your values, and other people have filled your cup because you're putting yourself around other people that have that, you can make some extraordinary things happen. And that's really, I think, what a lot of people are missing is that element of that's how your thoughts are going to eventually translate. Your thoughts need to be lifted up, and then at the same token, you need to get that support mechanism in so that all of a sudden the things you want to do, you've got the solutions around you. Your network has become a safety net. You can consider things you've never ever heard of before, right?
I just love the way you explain things, because you explain and I see the real picture, and I see a lot of actions that we can take from there. Because sometimes I think as an entrepreneur also, a lot of us new entrepreneurs think, okay, let's trust the universe and
it's not enough
and surrender some more. And like,
you want to hear a funny story on that? Here's a funny story for you. True story, by the way. So I had a friend who a couple of years ago, when The Secret came out, he went and saw the movie The Secret, and he came back to me and he says, I know that you're kind of involved with some of these people and you know them and this stuff. He says, I'm going to try and manifest a Ferrari. And I said, oh, okay, great. This is excellent. Let's see how that works. Anyways, I forgot about this a little bit, and so did he, and we didn't talk to each other for a while. Well, about 6 months later, he called me, and that's when I remembered, oh, the Ferrari. And he says, yeah, I want to go for lunch. And I'm like, oh, he's got the Ferrari. He's going to show me this Ferrari. And so I'm like, okay, well, let's go for lunch. So at the time, I had a 360 Medina Spider. It's a Ferrari. So I drove mine, bright yellow one, and I'm looking through the parking lot of this restaurant to see where his car is, and I don't see a Ferrari in the parking lot. So I'm thinking, maybe he parked in the underground or something. So I drove into the underground and parked my car, and I don't see a Ferrari there either. So I'm like, I don't know. He's probably just got it somewhere else, whatever. So I come in, and there he is sitting at the table, but he's got this girl beside him. And, we chit chat, we talk about these pleasantries. And then he says, well, I bet you're wondering about that Ferrari. And I kind of played dumb. I said, oh yeah, I forgot about that. I remembered, but I pretended I didn't remember. Yeah. And he then turned to the girl and he goes, this is my new personal assistant. And she went and handed her business card across, and the name on it, Adriana Ferrari. That was her name. Now, the thing that's interesting, and maybe your listeners want to write this down because this is important when we talk about manifesting things too,
right?
Is that a goal that is specific and clear becomes attainable and near. I'll say it again. A goal that is specific and clear becomes attainable and near. So it's not just enough to send it out to the universe and go, and then hope that it shows up. Back to this idea of increasing probability, we need to get very clear with what we want. In fact, one of the things that I teach a lot of my students is how to manifest using a vision board. But my approach is different, right? Like, no kidding, when I first started, I cut out pictures of stuff too, and I put them on, and that's how my vision board was. But the reality is I had a friend who's not involved in personal development. No kidding, he's worth about $800 million. He came to my house and he took a look at my vision board and he says, you're missing some stuff on here. I said, what do you mean? Yeah, like, do you do vision boards? He goes, yeah, but they're a little bit different. So I said, tell me what I should have on my vision boards. The first thing he says is you need to get very specific with why you want it. So he pointed out that your why power always precedes your willpower. Many people will often say, I'd like to have this, but it's not strong enough that it becomes a priority in their life, right? And by the way, the thing with the vision board as well that I love, it's not that the vision board brings it into your life, it's that the vision board keeps you focused, right? So you're now always looking for opportunities that will allow that to happen. A vision board is a tool of focus more than anything. Anyways, that's number one. And then he pointed out, say I had a Ferrari on there, he pointed out that you don't have written there how much it costs. You also don't have written there the specific model that you want, right? And so if you've got something that you know what it costs, in fact, here's an example. With that 360 Medina Spider, the Ferrari that I bought, I knew how much it was worth, right? I knew how much it cost. So when it appeared in the marketplace in 2008 is when I bought it. Remember the recession was going down?
Yes.
And people needed to liquidate things. They didn't have the money to pay the bills. Well, I had a dealership that I found that had the yellow 360 Medina Spider that I wanted, but because somebody couldn't afford it, they brought it back to the dealership. So now I could recognize how much it was, but how much they were selling. So I could see that it was a good opportunity, right? So if we know the specifics, we can start recognizing those opportunities when they appear, right? So I think those are two really important things that you need to have on your vision board. You need to have some specifics and your emotion, not just a picture, right? And that way you can recognize it when it appears. Because I think many people, again, they say that they want something in passing, but every opportunity shows up that could give it to them and they never take action on it because they're not clear enough to recognize it when it shows up, right?
Right. Oh, I love it. Again, you bring out the specific idea and picture. That so cool. So help us here a little bit, because there's a thin line of misunderstanding, and when we cannot understand it, then we don't get what we want to have, right?
Well, and also the human brain only gets started with what it can do, not what it could do. In fact, if the human brain is given a whole pile of choices and it doesn't see how this could really work, part of our brain shuts down. Now, I know this is maybe something even for another day, but there's really 5 ways that your brain sorts information. And I'll just go through them really, really quick, all 5. The first and probably most important way, I'm starting backwards, is intuition. Intuitional learning. Like, we always start here. It's all of our goals start from our emotions, our guts, hey, I could do that. This is exciting. Yeah, this is where we all start. We get exciting, but then our brain actually starts to evaluate. And the first thing, and by the way, not always in this order for everybody, but the first thing is it does factual learning with it. Our brain has a certain place that it produces or places information, like 1 + 1 is 2. We put that somewhere. That's a fact. Can't be disputed, right? The sky is blue. Well, we put that in as a fact. Now, by the way, I might mention that sometimes humans can have arguments because sometimes we have different sets of facts. If you're married, listen carefully. I promise a lot of times your wife's got different facts than you do, right? And so facts doesn't always mean that it's true, but it means it's true for you. Okay? So facts is one of the ways we learn. The next way that we often learn is what we call experiential learning. Now, there's certain things that we can only learn because we've done them. For example, if you were to ride a bike, you can't really read a book on riding a bike or say playing a guitar or a musical instrument and do it. You've actually got to pick up a guitar and play. You've got to get on a bike and do it, right? Experiential is really important. Now, by the way, I'm going to just share something that is kind of funny. You know, our senses that we have, our 5 senses, sight, sound, smell, touch, hearing, all that kind of stuff, that was developed by Sir Isaac Newton, the same guy who the apple fell from the tree and he talked about gravity. But the thing is he was a bit of a dense guy, not as smart as everybody thinks he is, because there is an additional sense, a 6th sense that he should have had. We don't have 5 senses, we've got 6, and I'm not talking about intuition. The sense that he missed was balance. Right? Like, that is a physical sense. And if I don't have balance, I can't do the bike. I can't even sit on this chair. So anyways, I'm smarter than Sir Isaac Newton. Anyways, that's another story. The third way that we learn is what we call social learning. In other words, things that come from the families that we're raised in, the communities that we're part of, the religions that we're a group of, the cultural group, like fill in the blank, all social learning, right? So that comes from around us. And then the final way that I'll just share here is what we call spatial learning, okay? And that's how we organize things. So if you think about it, when you're hanging a picture on the wall and you want it to be straight, you're hanging it to be straight in measurements against whatever else is around you, right? That's what makes it straight. Or if you're playing Tetris, you're putting the pieces in spatially, you're learning as you go where to put them based on the context of everything else, right? Or if you build a jigsaw puzzle, that's spatial learning as well. Now, we won't get into this too detailed, but spatial learning occurs both in our brain, but also externally. But here's the thing that's interesting, is if we look at things like the vision boards, and I'm just gonna talk about spatial for a minute, the reality is that spatial also involves processes. Right? Like a recipe, a pattern, a blueprint, right? Any of these things. And so if I told you right away, you can be a millionaire, your brain is going to completely doubt you until you have a process. Right? So in other words, you might say, I know I could be, because the awareness that we talked about earlier, you've seen other millionaires, you know they're out there. There's people that are driving these nice cars, wearing these nice clothes, going on trips. But for you, you're going to say it's unlikely because you may not have the process figured out yet. And so you'll doubt it. And it's not a matter of, again, someone simply saying, here's a process. Your brain now has to receive a process it believes it can actually create, right? So if I said to you this idea, you can become a millionaire in 6 minutes and 32 seconds, that's the world record. Yes, someone's done it, but you're gonna say, yeah, but I could never do that because I don't have process. I don't have process. But if I showed you now a more believable process for someone who's like the janitor at the school who has a job, and if I said in the course of 25 years, you could become a millionaire if you followed this exact pattern of saving, of spending, of how you did it, that might be more attainable because you've got a similar starting point to someone else, right? But that doesn't mean that you couldn't change your starting point or you couldn't adopt something that is a little bit more dramatic. You just need to have your brain understand the truth of that pattern, right?
I love it.
Yeah. But by the way, something interesting about patterns that I thought was funny. So I was doing an event for Predictable Millionaire not too long ago. And I had a fellow who was a lawyer, a litigation lawyer, come up to me during the break. And his name was Eric. And he said, you know what's really interesting? He said, if I had to go to court to prove a fact, like to prove something's true, that if I had one or two expert witnesses, the judge would probably consider that valid. If I had 5 or 6 expert witnesses, then of course it's a fact. And he says, if I had a dozen, it's indisputable. Then he pointed out that you have interviewed more than 700 millionaires. There is no disputing that you've got the best information out there on how to build a millionaire pattern. Yeah. And I think that's interesting, right? So if someone's interested in those patterns, come and join us. I'm happy to share them for you. That Facebook group is a free place to start. But we've got a lot of really cool things that nobody's talking about, right? That nobody really is aware of because no one's done the research, right?
Wow, that's amazing. Again, Douglas, thank you so much. I would love to invite you to come back here again.
I'd love to.
And this is very fun conversation. I never have this fun conversation before. I learned so much for myself as well. Well, I'm going to post the Facebook name and then the website and everything that people can find you. Seriously, guys, this is like your chance, your opportunities to get to where you want to go in life. Thank you so much, Douglas, for being here today.
Anytime, really fun. Next time we'll talk about entrepreneurs.
This is just the beginning. We haven't started yet. Thank you so much for being here.
Anytime.